So, recently there was news that Square Enix was considering dropping the numbers from the titles for the mainline Final Fantasy series. As game series continue to get more entries and they continue to use numbers in their names as signifiers of a new main entry, eventually you end up like Final Fantasy, where the series has really big numbers in the titles, like now with the upcoming Final Fantasy 16. The franchise has been around for nearly 40 years at this point. In another 40 years, it's very possible we could have a Final Fantasy 37. There are pros and cons to using numbers for each new entry in your franchise. Let's hear the bad news first and talk about some of the cons. Number 1, it's daunting for new players. I think when most people see a number in a game's title, they assume they should probably play the older games first for the sake of context and understanding the plot. It's reasonable to think that you should play Half-Life before playing Half-Life 2. So when the numbers start getting outrageous, it can be a potential turnoff for people looking to get into the series, as no one wants to do homework just to play a cool new game they just saw. Number 2, it's just not as interesting. Using numbers for your titles is not particularly exciting. Like, come on, what sounds cooler? Zelda 5 or Zelda Ocarina of Time? Ocarina of Time is intriguing, it's interesting, it's unique. Using words in subtitles makes games have a bit more personality in their names. It also makes the games easier to remember. When I hear Mega Man 5, I kind of have to rack my brain a bit to remember what that game is about, but if I hear Super Mario Galaxy, I immediately know you're talking about the Mario game in space. Number 3. It's really confusing for timelines. The most annoying thing ever is when games use numbers in game series that aren't in chronological order. First there was Metal Gear Solid, and then Metal Gear Solid 2, which takes place after that, which is cool. But then Metal Gear Solid 3 takes place before Metal Gear Solid 1. Metal Gear Solid 4 takes place after Metal Gear Solid 2, but then Metal Gear Solid 5 takes place after Metal Gear Solid 3, but before Metal Gear Solid 1. Street Fighter 2 takes place after Street Fighter 1, and Street Fighter 3 takes place after 2, which is fine. But then Street Fighter 4 takes place after 2, but before 3. Street Fighter 5 takes place after 4, and also before 3. Then Street Fighter 6 takes place after 3. But the weirdest part of it all is that Street Fighter Alpha, which in Japan is called Street Fighter Zero, takes place after Street Fighter 1 but before Street Fighter 2. Seriously, why play around with the numbers if they aren't even chronological? Number 4. It's confusing if the series uses numbers for any other reason. Some games like to use non-sequential numbers for certain reasons. This was a big trend on the Nintendo 64, where tons of games used 64 at the end of their names, like Super Mario 64, Wave Race 64, and who could forget Madden Football 64. This also happens a lot with games that decide to use year numbers at the end of their names, like Just Dance and the old King of Fighters games. Let's look at Tetris. We've got Tetris, Tetris 2, Super Tetris 3, Tetris 64, Tetris 2002, Tetris 360, Tetris 2008, and Tetris 99. How is anyone supposed to figure out what order these games were released in without a Wikipedia article? Number 5. It doesn't really make sense once you develop non-numbered entries. Take GTA 5 for example. It doesn't really make sense to call it GTA 5 when it's like the 12th GTA game. Once you start involving spin-offs and or games that don't have numbers in them, it just seems silly to continue with the numbers. Sometimes what game developers will do is start with numbers, then stop using them, then continue using them, which makes you wonder why they even stopped using them in the first place. But now that we've talked about some cons, let's get positive and talk about some pros. Number 1, numbers are a nice way to show the progression of your series, at least if done correctly. Battlefield and Mortal Kombat think they're so cute for using a 1 in their titles, even though we know those are definitely not the first games in their respective series. But outside of incidents like those, numbers are an easy way of showing you when a game was made relative to all of the others. Unless you're familiar with the Harvest Moon series, there's no way you'd know off rip that Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life was made before Harvest Moon: Magical Melody, but after Harvest Moon: Saved the Homeland. Numbers do a good job of letting you know the order in which the games came out, and generally speaking, even if a game series' numbered entries aren't chronological, you'll always be able to understand what's going on if you play in release order. Number 2. They identify mainline entries. When I say mainline, I mean big, significant entries in a franchise. These are the games that will most likely add to the story in a major way or act as a tone setter for that particular era of the franchise. So for example, when you see Resident Evil 2, you know it's an important game that you need to play. But if you see Resident Evil Revelations or Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, you're not sure if it's something you need to be worried about. Numbers mean the game is a new major title, as opposed to just another spin-off or side story. There's a level of esteem or status that comes with a numbered title. Of course, this can have the opposite effect too. It can make titles that don't have a number seem insignificant. See the Kingdom Hearts series, where people assume that you didn't need to play Coded 358 over 2 days, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and Chi to understand everything in Kingdom Hearts 3. Number 3, it's fun seeing how far the numbers can go. As game franchises get higher and higher in their numbered entries, it's entertaining to see how far they can take it. Mega Man is already on Mega Man 11, Poppin' Music stopped at 20, and Beatmania 2DX is already on 30. Personally, I kind of like the absurdity of it. When I'm an old man, I want to talk to my buddies about how Luigi's Mansion 47 isn't nearly as good as Luigi's Mansion 28 or the spin-off Luigi's Apartment Complex. Number 4, it's simple. Using numbered titles is just straightforward and it works. While not a video game, I like how the PlayStation video game consoles just use numbers for each new home system, unlike Nintendo where their consoles are named after funny sounds you make as a kid, and Microsoft they just use random words, numbers, and letters for their systems. Number 5, it doesn't take a lot of work. Eventually, coming up with words and subtitles for sequel names starts to become a chore. Castlevania 1 and 2 are a lot simpler to come up with than Castlevania Symphony of the Night or Castlevania Lament of Innocence. Now that we've been through the pros and cons, I guess it's time to answer the question posed by the title of the video. Should games have numbered titles? Well, I do agree that seeing a franchise with a lot of numbered entries can be a little scary for new players. However, we've seen time and time again that this isn't always a problem. Look at Persona 5. Despite being the 5th game in the series, it's been by far the most popular. For another example, look at the game franchise that even started this conversation, Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII was the game that brought the series into huge mainstream popularity. I think it helps that both Final Fantasy and Persona are series that use numbers in their titles, but each game has its own storyline that doesn't too significantly connect to the other games. And even if the games are chronological, most game developers do a pretty decent enough job at making new entries in the series accessible to new players by doing things like recaps at the beginning of the game, reintroducing old characters, or they can simply make their plots more episodic in nature, like the Sonic series where each game's plot is connected to the last, but they're all self-contained stories that you can enjoy on their own. I guess my take is, I don't see a problem with using numbered titles as long as the series sticks with the numbered titles. I don't like it when game series flip-flop between using numbers and using subtitles and using subtitles with numbers and using numbers with numbers and all that other wacky stuff. Dance Dance Revolution went from having a very simple naming scheme of a number and mix at the end of its names, like Dance Dance Revolution 2nd Mix, Dance Dance Revolution 3rd Mix, etc., all the way up to Dance Dance Revolution 5th Mix, to then naming the next game DDR Max Dance Dance Revolution 6th Mix. They put an abbreviation of the game's title at the beginning of the game's name along with the word max, which to me signifies that this is supposed to be some sort of new leap forward for the series, but then they also kept the sequential number plus mix thing at the end there. Then we got DDR Max 2 Dance Dance Revolution 7th Mix. So now we've got 2 sequential number things going on. Then they realized, that was kind of dumb, so they scrapped the Max name and the next game was called Dance Dance Revolution Extreme. Then Dance Dance Revolution SuperNova. Then Dance Dance Revolution SuperNova 2. So, okay, we're back to using numbers again. Then Dance Dance Revolution X, which was made for the series' 10th anniversary and is also the 10th mainline game, so you could say that the X in the name could also represent a Roman numeral 10. Then we got Dance Dance Revolution X2, 2, then Dance Dance Revolution X3 versus Second Mix, which had an HD version of Second Mix in the game. So we got multiple numbers in the title again, and a versus in the middle there. Then they rebooted the series and just called the new game Dance Dance Revolution. Then that game got an update, which is also just called Dance Dance Revolution, but Konami later started referring to those two games separately as Dance Dance Revolution 2013 and Dance Dance Revolution 2014 in the song select for future games. Then they released Dance Dance Revolution Ace, then Dance Dance Revolution Ace 20 to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the series, then Dance Dance Revolution Ace 3, and oh boy, I haven't even mentioned some of the lesser known updated versions in the series like Dance Dance Revolution Third Mix version Korea 2. Man, I love DDR. Anyways, numbered titles are fine as long as they're used responsibly.